Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Supply Chain Solutions Weekly Ship Show. Today is November 4th, 2021, and this is episode number 24 in our weekly educational series that keeps you informed of these unprecedented and uncertain market conditions, as well as the emerging trends in supply chain today. As always, it is my pleasure to welcome my Ship Show co-host, Jason Brand, our Director of Business Development, who joins me each week on our journey. And finally, my name is Anthony D'Ambrosio. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Supply Chain Solutions, the company that always strives to find a better way and deliver results. And as usual, we'd like to thank our Director of Marketing, Vanessa Fry, for producing today's show. So folks, we have a very interesting topic for you today, something that everyone has probably already heard about. We're going to be discussing why there will be devastating fallout from the crazy California port fees as the Federal Maritime Commission waits for details on the California port surcharges. I am sure that you've heard of the surprise decision by the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach this week to impose the hefty surcharges on ocean carriers that take too long removing containers from overcrowded terminals, and it has actually raised more questions than answers. Many of us in the freight forwarding industry of professionals and the Federal Maritime Commission want to know where the twin ports are getting their authority to levy the surcharges. Port officials announced the fees this past Monday, November 1st, and the two harbor commissions voted to approve them this past Friday. But after checking with our FMC attorney, we found that the FMC has yet to receive any documentation describing the plan. Now, what is unclear is whether the Southern California ports will draw their authority from an 8-year-old agreement with the Federal Maritime Commission, allowing the two agencies to discuss and collaborate on projects and programs that address congestion issues, transportation infrastructure, and pollution reduction, or will it draw its authority from an FMC agreement with the California Association of Port Authorities that dates back to the mid-1940s? Again, that dates back to the mid-1940s. It is also important to know that the Shipping Act of 1984 grants immunity from antitrust laws to maritime terminal operators so they can agree on common operational practices. But in order to receive the immunity, parties must file notice with the Federal Maritime Commission outlining the topics and actions they want to undertake together. Now, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach compete with each other for cargo, but have collaborated much more in recent years to better compete against ports in other regions that are gaining in container market share. They also work together to address joint problems such as security and carbon emissions. But it's also important to note that the Commission has requested information from the ports about the announcement, and responses are expected imminently. The information provided by the ports will be reviewed to inform the FMC Commission of any next steps. Now, let's keep in mind that the Commission regularly requests additional information from agreement parties as part of its oversight and monitoring activities, and it's a very powerful regulatory agency, just like US Customs or the IRS. We like to joke around in the freight forwarding industry that they have the power of life and death, just like, US Customs or the IRS. Now, under the Los Angeles Long Beach proposal, ocean carriers will be charged $100 per day, increasing in $100 increments per container per day for containers scheduled to move locally by truck that dwell for 9 days or more, and for containers scheduled to move by intermodal rail that dwell for 6 days or more. And the levies were effective this past Monday, November 1st. So Vanessa, would you be so kind as to bring up slide number 1? just so everyone can take a quick look at it. So I found a really great slide, folks, that sort of illustrates, the type of surcharges and how they can get out of control, and why there will be a devastating fallout from the crazy California port fees as we wait for more details on the California port surcharges as the FMC waits for this. And the graph basically goes on to explain that the cumulative charges per container per day after the deadline are as follows. So charge of $100 per day, increasing $100 per day, and by day 30, the charges could potentially reach $46,500 per container, which is mind-blowing, to be frank. So it's a very fluid and touchy situation. Now, the carriers have indicated that they expect to pass on the fees to the import customers, but the storage time clock starts this past Monday, November 1st. Now, they may have to absorb the initial assessments themselves because the FMC approved tariff rules require terminal operators and carriers to give customers a 30-day notice on any tariff charges. Now, this is a FMC regulation. And that's the skinny of these surcharges, folks. And I'd like to just recap one more time the surcharge and the concept. So because of the historically high congestion, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have officially reached unprecedented, historically high congestion. This week, in looking at the satellite imagery just this past Monday, nearly 90 container ships are at the anchorage in the San Pedro Bay. And there are 28 vessels that are actually berthed and working, okay? Taking containers on and taking containers off. So we need to keep in mind that the average dwell time at the anchorage is usually 14 to 18 days, is currently 14 to 18 days, which in itself is crazy. Because if you just remember, maybe 14 months ago, the average dwell time in the San Pedro Bay was only 3.4 days, okay? So these numbers have been steadily increasing for the past 15 months, and we expect it to increase even further on the horizon. So let's talk about the emergency surcharge fee that they're implementing or mandating. So in an attempt to make removing cargo a serious effort, the Biden administration issued an emergency fee, which went into effect on November 1st, 2021, and the fees will begin to incur starting just this past Monday. So I think our current administration had really good intentions in mandating this fee. Now, what are the details on the emergency fee and what's the timeline? So the fee will be imposed on containers dwelling for 9 days or more for truck moves and 3 days for containers bound for the rails. So for example, day 1 of the fee begins on the 9th day, or the 3rd day if it's a rail-bound container. So what's the fee structure? The fee is $100 on the 9th day, or the 3rd day if it's a rail-bound move, and increases by an additional 100 days as they build. So for example, on day 2, it would be $200 plus $100, and on day 3, that would equal $300, okay, plus $200, plus $100, etc. So it can be very confusing and convoluted. So this is why we feel in the freight forwarding community that this is going to cause a lot of confusion, and devastation may be a harsh word, but it's really going to cause a lot of issues. The fee is inclusive of all calendar days, including weekends and holidays, and there is no maximum cap, and there is no exemption for any circumstance. So let's talk about the collection and the billing now. So the port authorities will bill the steamship lines, the container ship lines, but the fees will be passed along to the customers. Now, there is still some gray area in assessing the fee, such as no available appointments to pickup times, the containers not being available, or the rails metering their flow of the freight due to the congestion. However, though, the fee is explicit in its intended meaning of no exceptions, and it's unavoidable due to this being a government mandated fee. So, again, it's a very fluid situation. Just keep in mind, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Jason, your local customer service representative at Supply Chain Solutions, and we will do everything in our power to give you clarity of the situation. But that's where we're at today with the fees and the surcharges. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my awesome Ship Show co-host, Jason Brand, who's going to go over the market conditions.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Great points as usual. Let's dive into that first slide of the freight market roundup. All right, so our Transpacific eastbound lane. So first and foremost, let's run through those terms. So TFEB, that's Transpacific eastbound. So as of Tuesday, there were 77 container ships waiting at berth and at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So the Transpacific eastbound it's just continued to be a really tough lane for importers. And now with shippers scrambling to avoid these new fees, it's going to get a whole lot more challenging. The new announced fees, as Anthony went over, they start at that $100 per day, and then they increase day by day. LA and Long Beach, as Anthony mentioned, this is going to be the starting point, but this is going to trickle around. So get prepared for that. Shippers are arguing that the fees are more damaging to small and medium-sized shippers. And some of the large retailers, they've got specific contracts allowing them more free time. So it could be more damaging to small, medium-sized businesses. Keep that in mind when you are shipping. Also, the rail companies have been instituting their own fees right now. And this is because container dwell times have been increasing. So Union Pacific is seeing a 40% increase in container dwell times and a 20% increase in street dwell times for chassis. Obviously, you've got the two ends of this equation kind of fighting, so it's difficult to find a solution here. Also, Husky Terminal, this is over in Stevedore in Tacoma, Washington. It's one of the 10 container terminals that the Northwest Seaport Alliance of Seattle and Tacoma are calling for a new fee, and it's called a long stay rehandling charge. And this is because of a lot of the new congestion is forcing these long staying containers to be moved multiple times. So that's also a new potential fee. Really, it's important to book in advance, and while you can avoid the LA and Long Beach ports, because this could be really challenging to avoid some of these extra fees. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so North America to Asia. So let's tackle a couple abbreviations that we normally talk about here. So this is going to be your USWC lane, or your US West Coast. It's coming in to, and then, or excuse me, it's leaving from, and then POL means port of loading. So first and foremost, China has pulled off just the complete impossible, and they amped up their domestic coal mining and usage to an incredible level of tenfold more than they normally. So the daily coal production in China is normally 1.11 million tons, and it's now 11.5 million tons. It's shocking how big of an increase that was. But a couple things to consider. There's been a pileup of container ships in Southeast Asia. So it's causing issues for some shipments. Singapore on Monday had a backlog 22% above what it normally experiences, and this is marking the highest backlog they've ever had. This is actually due to Typhoon Kompasu, and I might be saying that wrong, but it scattered ships more than 2 weeks ago around Hong Kong, and congestion rates are still elevated at more than 10.4% than normal. Yeah, the ports of Shanghai, Ningbo, and Zhoushan had a combined 271 container ships waiting at berth or waiting to berth. And then Hong Kong and Shenzhen had another 229 total container ships at berth or waiting to berth as well. Let's move on to the next slide. So North America to Europe. So a couple things to get us the line. So this is normally your transatlantic eastbound. So your keep that in mind. CRD, cargo ready date. So Europe is dealing with major driver shortages right now. The UK Road Haulage Association is saying the driver shortage could be as high as 100,000, while the International Road Transport Union, they anticipate that Spain will see more than a 200,000 truck driver shortage just this year. Germany's also battling with a shortage of 65,000 drivers. France is also estimated to have another 50,000 driver shortage. So really serious issue once you get past those ports. Import cargo that's arriving at European ports is being tied up at congestion literally through every point, and all the way to the shippers' warehouses. Manufacturers actually surveyed in the October PMI reported production constraints being experienced by their suppliers alongside a growing list of logistical issues. And this is including the lack of shipping containers, also inadequate freight capacity, that port congestion, and obviously the driver shortages. So keep in mind when shipping between North America and Europe. Let's move on to Europe to North America. So Europe to North America, we are dealing with more congestion than usual. This is partially due to the congestion shift. A couple things to keep in mind, and this has been a process that's been going on. So warehouse space on the East Coast is getting more expensive and it's getting tighter because companies such as Williams-Sonoma and Bed Bath & Beyond and others, they're upping their presence around the New York, New Jersey port area. So Williams actually just took down 1 million more square feet right in that region. It's driving warehouse prices up as well. And it's driving more congestion to that area as well. So the flip side of this situation, the Savannah port is actually improving quite a lot. So the average shipper dwell times at the import, when you were importing, it went from a high of 12 days in September to 7 days now. And the current number of container ships waiting to berth was 30, and now it's 23. So there is some progress. This is partially due to a lot of those shipments being rerouted. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but they have been making efforts at improving their processes to kind of deal with some of this. Also, Georgia, there is more than 20 million square feet of warehousing space that's going to be coming online before the end of the year. So that should help alleviate some of these higher than usual warehousing prices, and also give shippers an option to cancel their shipment at the ports, move to a local warehouse if they'd like. On top of this, also the Georgia Port Authority is working on at least doubling the amount of space where they can ground containers to kind of help process some of these new levels. So all this is happening currently, and yeah, that's the main stuff here. Let's move on to the next one. Asia to Europe. So when we get back to this Asian shipping market, it's important to remember that there's a lot of issues in Asia. Obviously, they are coming full steam out of this power situation. There was a huge backlog. After Golden Week, we saw that dip in rates and then a burst of people making purchases. And now we've got these new fees that are being implemented in obviously the West Coast. Asia to Europe, it's classically a very important lane. A lot of the brand new mega container ships, their first voyages, they start on this lane. And the months before the Chinese New Year, this lane sees a really big boost in volume. Now, it's going to be predicted that this lane will be greater demand than normal, even considering these new demand norms this year versus previous years. And this is because, on top of all the congestion and the issues getting containers and equipment and the lack of container ships and, the blank sailings, we also have Chinese New Year happening 2 weeks earlier this year. So we're already seeing an effect on rates that is likely going to increase. So if you're shipping Asia to Europe, keep that in mind. You could be seeing some pretty high rates coming up pretty soon, sooner than normal this year. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, India to North America. So it is we do have the festival coming up. They're going to be off until November 6th, so there will be delays. And this is definitely not outside of the norms. We've mentioned it in the past, but India, they've just been having consistent issues keeping up with their schedule reliability. So an interesting kind of fact that's come out of this, that's a result of these port of loading emissions and just other issues with schedule reliability, is their volume slipped 2.2% in September compared with the previous month. And that is 100% due to schedule reliability issues. They have plenty of volume, they're just not processing it. So keep that in mind if you're shipping out of India. Indian exporters are actually looking to take advantage of this peak season demand, but they've been forced to kind of reconfigure their shipment plans. And carriers have begun discharging their cargo that's meant to go to India elsewhere, adding more ground costs and just more time for the cargo owners. So it has been very challenging and very unique in India. They've been working on it, but I'd like to see, an improvement, obviously, in that throughput from this month to, when we look at October to September, or particularly from October to November. And ships have had to wait 7 to 14 days to get berth, and it's really severely impacting the turnaround time. Well, let's move on to North America to South America. So I've said this a few times, we've got a great Miami office and they've done a really good job. We've got imports and exports going both directions on a weekly basis right now. If you're having a challenge with this lane, you really need to talk to Ivan. He will help you out and he will set your expectations, and he does a great job. So definitely talk to our Miami office if you're having challenges. We are having challenges, but it hasn't been anything that's, full stop or really extreme. A couple things going on though in South America, and they've been developing, is they are experiencing an extreme drought right now. This has really decreased the amount of exports. So for example, just the beginning of this year, soybean exports were down by 2/3, and then they provide a lot of feed to us and also European nations, and that is down by almost 3/4. So there is a little bit of challenges there. They have been capitalizing on with the steel and aluminum market, because they're kind of in a sweet spot right now. And again, as I mentioned, we have been able to get stuff through. Just make sure you are booking in advance with all these lanes. With North America to South America, you get a little bit more leniency, but make sure you are booking in advance. Let's finish ourselves off with the air freight section. All right, so Asia, Europe, and America. So ultimately, it's been working. Obviously, we've got higher rates than usual right now. The Transpacific eastbound market capacity is fully booked, and we've been telling this to people for a while. We still have been able to get bookings, but you have to remember that the air terminals in the US particularly are full. So, free time is extremely limited right now. You're likely to pay for some warehousing or some storage, potentially on both sides of your shipment. So keep that in mind. But getting out of Asia, it is fully booked. You need to book in advance. With Europe, the rates have remained pretty steady. Steady as there is enough capacity to meet demand. They've been having issues with their manufacturing sector just due to these supply chain issues. So as a result, capacity has been a little bit easier to come by in Europe. And then the Americas. Anthony, do you have any good insight on some air freight recent experiences you've had with the Americas?
Well, I think that as it says here on our slide, that the demand has remained very steady, and there is a lot of volatility globally, but I also feel that, the air freight market in the Americas is one of the geographical regions around the globe that, it's not as challenging as it is from, say, Asia Pacific to US or Europe, or from Europe to USA. There are still some backlogs, and there is still a lot of cargo coming in, but I don't know. I don't think it's quite as bad as some of the other geographical areas. There's a steady demand, and there is plenty of freight still in the pipeline, but I think they're just managing it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. I haven't had really a bad experience with some North America to South America air freight in the past month. So, it's been kind of a shining spot, but I don't want to give everybody the wrong impression. So yeah. Hey, that's what we got today for our freight market update though.
Well, that is fantastic, Jason. And thank you for such a usual awesome job. We're going to turn this over to our Director of Marketing, Vanessa Fry, to see if we have any questions.